This podcast contains explicit language, discussions of depression, derealization, self-harm, and suicide. Listener discretion is advised. This is episode 5 of a continuing series about a disastrous crime committed by a teenage boy in a California mall of 2004. If you are just joining us, please go back and listen to the first 4 episodes. We continue now with the first-hand account from Blair Van Auken, best friend of perpetrator Conrad Cliff, after 18 years of silence on the subject. This is MallWalk. Episode 5, The Hammerhead. The hammerhead shark first arrived in our oceans around 20 million years ago. Hammerheads have long been an iconic poster villain of ocean predators for their ghoulish, surreal appearance, with flattened, stretched-out skulls known as cephalofoils, with eyes at either end. But despite media depictions of hammerheads as remorseless man-eaters, such as on the cover of the early 90s Goosebumps novel Deep Trouble, or as the antagonist in the mid-90s remake of Flipper, until that day at the Royal Galleria, there had never been a single recorded case of a hammerhead shark killing a human being. Up until this stage in the story, the anachronisms and strange details of the crime alerted my journalistic instincts at multiple turns. The confluence of confusions and cruelties around the fountain, the placement of a lost arcade game just over a hidden trapdoor, the movement of water, the sudden surge, the uneven flood course, the seemingly miraculous appearance of Conrad and his jackhammer right where Blair happened to be standing before the hammerhead tank. There, we encounter another layer that defies reason. Like all fish, the hammerhead shark requires a very specific makeup of salinity, pH level, and temperature in order to survive. Such factors are finely calculated by aquarium workers to simulate the ocean environment. According to the Mercury News, those 2 hammerheads, those dream eaters, were named St. Denis and St. Paul for 2 cities on the island nation Mauritius, the coasts of which hammerheads are known to frequent. When Conrad's jackhammer shattered the tempered glass of the tank and they spilled into the murky, debris-choked floodwaters, one of the hammerheads, St. Denis, thrashed about, struggled, and died almost immediately. This is not surprising. This makes perfect sense. What is surprising, what defies reason, is that the other shark, St. Paul, did not die. He swam blindly through the muddy floodwaters, somehow navigating the submerged maze and finding his way out the main entrance of the aquarium.
When the tank shattered, there was this explosion of glass and water. And I saw the two sharks go down like a waterfall out of the glass. And I remember feeling these bites all over my face. It was this hailstorm of glass all over my cheeks and neck. And then, before I could reach up and brush the glass away and open my eyes, I swallowed this face full of salt water, and my lungs filled with it. And I was drowning. And I was tumbling, and I hit this wall, and I started twirling against it like in a whirlpool, and I lost all sense of direction, and I thought that was the end. I hoped it was the end.
The San Mateo Daily Journal, the Bay Area Reporter, and the San Francisco Chronicle all reported the attacks that day in the flooded mall as being perpetrated by a hammerhead shark of the Sphyrna zygana, or mid-sized skull variety, citing witness reports, the aquarium director, and the Kings Moat Aquarium website. But several scientists commenting on the incident after the fact posited that the survival and aggression in such a situation seemed almost impossible for a hammerhead, and much more akin to the behavior and survivability of a bull shark. Bull sharks can survive in brackish waters. Some have even been known to swim upstream into lakes, and they are known for being very aggressive, responsible for several human fatalities. Animal behaviorist Dr. Peter Kimley of UC Davis, who has dived with hammerhead sharks on multiple occasions, also came to the defense of the shark.
I've spent my life trying to communicate that sharks are not that dangerous and that they have complexity in their behavior. And I thought to myself, God, those poor animals. It's bad enough being in a tank where you can't have as large a harm range, but in that, in perspective of what happened is that these sharks were swimming around in the tank, and suddenly the tank was hit and the glass broke, and all this water roared out onto the floor, and there these poor sharks swimming around. The interesting thing about the hammerhead shark is it's just such a unique animal. It has got this head that I felt would teach me something really important, and complexity of behavior in the schools. The females fight amongst each other for the males, and so you can actually swim. When I'm free diving at times, I could, at the surface swimming, I could reach down and touch them. And I found out that they weren't so dangerous. When I first dove, I was at the surface looking down, and could see them underneath, and took a big breath, and suddenly diving down, and suddenly they're on either side of me, and I'm actually underneath the school looking up at them, silhouettes of them. They have to come back. And sure enough, they didn't attack me, but the hammerheads have very small mouths. They had a big head, but the mouth is small, and they eat fish and squid. They don't. And then I realized that after a while, I thought, why are people so scared of these things? They have tiny mouths, and they eat squid. So probably because of the head, it's somewhat unique. Maybe that's why these people have taken the hammerhead shark and tried to demonize it. But usually they demonize the white shark. But if they are solitary and cornered, let's say there's if you corner them, they have a threat, just like if you corner a cat, and it erects its fur, it arches its back, bares its teeth, it hisses, and the sharks have a display where they swim in a figure eight back and forth, and they do hunch, and they move their pectorals down so they seem larger. Their head is up, and if you keep on getting closer, and a colleague of mine took a submersible and he approached them, it'd go around and they'd bite it, So attacks are caused by that, and those attacks, Alan Balders many years ago, he saw an attack on a young boy, and there was something like 100. He had put in 100 stitches, but no flesh was removed. So he started wondering about, is this feeding when there's no flesh removed? Wrote an article, shark attack, feeding or fighting, and then this display was described. Now, the other way attacks occur is that people will be so even like in Florida in shallow water, if people, and there are a lot of sharks there, get close to a shark and they don't even see it, it might do one of these displays and might bite them. But then also when they swim, they produce particle displacements that are like fish that they might feed upon. And so many attacks on people, at least in Florida, are on the feet and ankles. So they, unlike the bull shark, they don't enter brackish water.
Try as I might to identify members of the aquarium staff, and particularly what member may have served as the aquarium director at the Kingsmode Aquarium in the Royal Galleria in 2004, there are no extant records available, nor any names mentioned in any media coverage. Preceding the proliferation of camera phones, with only rudimentary, pixelated, and low-res flip phones being available at the time, there is no footage from that day. We must speculate that at some point, St. Paul the shark felt himself to be cornered and lashed out at the nearest perceived aggressor.
So what would happen is that in brackish water, since they have more salts, water would be coming into their bodies. I would say that, they can last. I don't know. That's a difficult question, just how long they can last. I don't think they're not going to die immediately, but given enough time that all this water enters their body, they become bloated and they can't get rid of it by urinating. That's a horrible experience if you're just imagine that. You don't swim and you don't know how to swim and suddenly you're underwater and you're in the water and you're just in another environment. This is and I would recommend giving it through the perspective of the shark a little bit, not just the people, but the shark. Oh God, it's so shallow water and it's so stressed, it's biting everything. Bit somebody, okay? In that way, where you kind of give him the benefit of the doubt.
The floodwaters spilled in 4 directions away from the central fountain, such that when St. Paul exited the aquarium, he would have been immediately swept westward in a river against which many frantic mall-goers attempted to push. And so it was that, perhaps brushing past plastic cups and overturned chairs from the food court, and many a struggling leg, St. Paul entered Mad Mab's 10-pin bowling alley. It seems that the Pinhead bowling team, consisting of the inventively cruel Blaze Wilkins, Cole Benson, and Oak Strauss, had retreated back to the bowling alley. Mad Mab's 10-pin alley marked the termination of the western hallway, and, as the flood proved, existed at a slight downward grade from the food court so that the floodwaters burst in, catching all bowlers, the entire rack of bowling shoes, chairs, trash, and even pins in the bedlam, until finally pooling in the circular hot dog stand at the back of the alley, creating an inescapable whirlpool into which Oak Strauss tumbled and cycled and thrashed, reaching out for his friend Blaze's hand. Blaze recounted in police interviews just after the fact that their fingers touched for a moment. Blaze had managed to lift himself up onto the top of a sticker machine and was balanced just above the water level. But the touch of his friend's fingers was brief. Blaze perched there on that small pole of metal, watching Oak Strauss swirl down into the maelstrom. But the boy did not drown. It is likely he might have surfaced nearby and caught a revitalizing breath, were it not for the natural course of all things in Mad Mabs toward that hot dog stand whirlpool, into which St. Paul, the cruelly liberated Hammerhead, also found himself pulled. Hammerhead sharks have only been known to attack humans in a defensive capacity when they feel cornered, and, in the wild, none of these attacks have ever proven fatal. And so, we are to believe the first fatal hammerhead shark attack on a human in recorded history occurred in the back of that bowling alley, whirling in the Charybdis of a sunken hot dog stand.
Nothing that annoys the scientists who study sharks than they're being called attacks. Bite. You might make that distinction.
The hammerhead may have felt threatened by the thrashing boy beneath the water, and so lashed up, clamping his jaw down on Oak's wrist, severing his radial artery.
Predation is a very rare event. I mean, you don't see it very often. So I would not say that the shark attacked people. I would say that the shark was stressed and maybe was just biting, whatever came close to him,
Blaze, from his sticker machine perch, recalls seeing the murky water take on a magenta color, and only afterwards noticed the dorsal fin. Deep at the end of Lane 6, the missing pinhead, Cole Benson, lay draped over a frozen pin sweeper. We cannot know if he was conscious when a strong current of water launched a 12-pound bowling ball down the gutter toward him. It struck him in the face and crushed his skull, killing him instantly. Blaze Wilkins survived that day, and during production of this story, I sought him for further comment, only to learn that in the winter of 2010, 6 years after the flood at the Royal Galleria, he threw himself off the Golden Gate Bridge. I can't help but wonder at the experience of St. Paul. At this point in the flood, the water must have taken on such a deep, clotted murk of trash and debris that it could not possibly have approached anything resembling ocean conditions. Yet the hammerhead went on thrashing, lost blindly in some backwater he could not possibly conceive, no sky above but the ceiling. It is hard to conceive of a saltwater fish, like the hammerhead, surviving in freshwater, or more accurately, dirty, chlorinated, debris-filled fountain water for more than a couple minutes. Yet the path of destruction indicates that St. Paul's next move was to turn about, escaping the pull of the hot dog stand whirlpool, and to swim down Lane 10 and over the edge into the gearworks where the pin setter lay frozen in mid-reset, not far from Cole's battered corpse. There, he claimed his second victim, bowling lane worker Mitt Ferguson, who had been in the midst of inspecting the pin setter when the flood had swept him off his feet. His thrashing might have attracted the attention of St. Paul, and the hammerhead seemingly locked his jaws around Ferguson's thigh and pulled him under the water. Other mallgoers reported being beset by jellyfish. This is another spurious report, as the bioluminescent jellyfish housed in the moat aquarium, as described in our last episode by Blair, were likely comb jellyfish, famous for their beautiful glow. Comb jellyfish are completely harmless and produce no sting. Still, with all the trash and debris whirling like shrapnel about the deluge, it is possible any number of things were cutting, biting, and stinging at desperate and drenched mallgoers. Around this same time, when the floodwaters were reaching their highest level, many witnesses report seeing the large, muscular boy who they would later associate with the commission of this whole terrible affair, climbing up out of the waters, onto the rim of the edges of the crucible of creation, laughing wildly, his face blushed red with excitement, staring up at the artificial skylight. Multiple reports indicate that he was shouting about eyes looking down on him. From the San Mateo Journal, November 13th, 2004, quote, "And he was saying, 'I see God's eyes, he has seen me,' said witness Bernard Sullivan." And from the San Francisco Chronicle, November 14th, 2004, quote, 2 anonymous reports say the boy was climbing the fountain and shouting, "God has seen me," as the floodwaters rose. And finally, from the Mercury News, November 13th, 2004, quote, Marcy Gutierrez, who braved the floodwaters, reports seeing a tall boy climb the fountain while laughing and then shout up at the ceiling, "I see the eyes. He has seen me. God has seen what I am doing." While this could all be the further progression of Conrad's delusions of corruption, of his crusade to rupture the dream of a tyrannical divinity, my interviews led me to a more literal interpretation.
After I got into the air vent, I started crawling.
Officer Wes Barker, the security guard at the time, who we last left saving himself from the flood and pulling himself into an air vent out of the pipeworks, in the negative space, beneath the mall's main floor.
The air vents were built over concrete. That's how I managed to get through it without it breaking. Unlike what you might see in movies, air vents are not usually strong enough to support a man's weight, certainly not a larger man like myself. So that's why when I got to the end and saw that it was just insulated tubing, I knew I couldn't go any further. It was too narrow anyway. I was lucky to be able to fit in this part of the vent to start with. So what I did was I scooted back a little and I found a grate on top of the vent and I just started pounding it. You ever see that the Tarantino movie? It's the bride, the one with the bride. It's like when she's in the coffin and she's like punching her way out. It was kind of like that. Like I kept punching it, and I was thinking about that movie too. It was screwed in place, but I just kept hitting it, and eventually the metal around it tore. And I pulled myself up, and I was in this concrete chute. And when I looked up, I saw light, and there was this totally vertical ladder going up toward the light. So I started climbing. I was exhausted. There were a few times where I felt like I couldn't go much further. And the chute was really narrow at this point, so I'd just sort of lean back against the concrete and rest. Then I'd keep climbing. I kept wondering if I was going to come out on the roof or where. I felt like I must have been climbing all the way to the 8th floor. But that place was messing with my sense of space, because when I finally got up to this plateau and pulled myself over the ledge, I realized I was in the artificial skylight. They'd always said it, but I'd never seen it. That skylight over the fountain, it wasn't a real skylight, of course. It was a real window over the ceiling, that's true. But they had this reflecting, glittery wallpaper draped on the ceiling in there, just above it. And there was this little, like a disco ball, I guess, spinning in the middle of it all. And all these wires and circuits and little blinking lights. It was weird to see. I dragged myself across the floor and into the gray light. I stared down through the skylight, and I saw the flood. I saw that kid climbing up the fountain, and he was laughing, and he was pointing up at me.
That's right. Wes Barker was looking down through the skylight at Conrad's zenith of ecstasy. It seems likely to me that it was Barker's eyes that Conrad saw gazing down on his deed, further cementing his delusion as some left-hand path destructor of God's creation.
All the waters were spilling out from the middle of the fountain, and then I saw this last big bubble crack the surface, and then it was still for a second, and then that spout, it turned into a drain. All the water reversed and started spilling back down, and I saw everyone started getting sucked toward the fountain, which was this big hole in the floor now, this giant whirlpool. And that kid just stayed up there, on top of the fountain, looking down into the hole. as other people screamed and went under.
A second Charybdis. Several witnesses across publications describe this turning point, when the waters went from pushing to pulling, when the issuing fountain turned into a drain. Among the reversals of fortune were St. Paul himself, who, still chewing on the leg of Mitt Ferguson, was now sucked east, up the western hallway, past his origin in the aquarium, past the melting ice rink in which a tornado of bladed shoes whirled, toward the fountain and the flooded food court. We know the names of several people who went down into the drain the crucible of creation made of itself. Marwa Connolly, Alicia Mann, Rosanna Bauer, Nathaniel Rowe, Jimmy Perry. There are others whose names we do not know, whose bodies were not found. Amina Dominguez, who was clutching the water fountain outside of the northwest bathroom, describes feeling the large heft of a hammerhead crashing into her leg, his dorsal fin apparent above the dark waters, thrashing his way toward the fluorescent lights of the megaplex lobby. At this moment, Wes Barker reports seeing the resurgence of one of our characters. In all my research, try as I might, I could not locate or identify Consuela. I'm not sure if Consuela was even her real name, or if she merely assumed that name in concert with Robert Bevilacqua's delusion. Whoever she was, she appeared then again at the base of the broken fountain.
All these people were going over the edge of the hole, down into the drain. It was horrible. But I remember this one girl, in a Catholic school uniform. She was getting pulled toward the hole in the middle of the fountain like everyone else. It's important to explain, if I haven't already, that the force of the water coming up had broken the concrete of the fountain, and the whole thing was just a big black mouth now, and you couldn't see the bottom of it, just black waters. But this girl in the school uniform managed to grab the part of the fountain that was still intact, the rim of the bowl, the same thing that the kid Cliff had climbed up on, and she was grabbing his ankle and saying something, but I couldn't hear it. And then there was another boy climbing up behind her, grabbing her leg, and then I saw Cliff stomp on her hand. And she fell back and fell on the boy behind her. I didn't see what happened to them until later. I thought they went down the drain, but I guess they didn't, because I did see them again later. After.
By the chaos of the drain, the noise of screams and water, the movement of the shark, no witnesses within earshot recount what Consuela might have said to Conrad on the edge of the ruined fountain, nor how he may have responded. I imagine recognizing the boy as among the pair that had saved her from the cruelty of the pinheads and the confusion of Robert Bevilacqua by that same fountain only hours before. She had recognized his good nature, had seen his current state of madness, and had tried to calm his fury and bring him away from the brink of the void. And just as he had done to his best friend Blair by the Hammerhead tank, Conrad had rejected her redemptive spirit, perhaps recognizing her trickery of his friend by the presence of her boyfriend at her heels, or perhaps simply in devotion to his madness, which in that moment, beneath the perceived gaze of God, was to him an ecstasy. Her survival is perhaps due to the fact that only moments later the waters leveled. The flood along the mall corridors matched water level within the draining hole, and the whirlpool dissipated. Several who had been sucked down bobbed up to the surface and hoisted themselves out.
I saw some people coming out and other people thrashing about. The waters were level now, and it was looking pretty desperate. I've seen it since, but I had never seen it before. When people are drowning and they're near other people, they start drowning them too, by accident. That's what was happening, and I then realized I didn't see Cliff anymore. He was gone. I knew I had to go down and help. I got up and looked around until I found the electrician's exit, where the maintenance guys come in and out. I followed that out, but I was in a lot of gray concrete hallways, a maze of them really. I really had a hard time navigating my way through, but finally I found my way back down to the floor.
Meanwhile, in the Megaplex, our pinball enthusiast Dimitri Severne and the recently rescued construction worker Maurice Reed were standing on the air hockey table after having witnessed 3 other arcade goers succumb to a shockwave of electricity over the water, issuing from several of the arcade machines. Further sparks assured them that the water was still a charged danger, and at this exact moment, a dorsal fin crested the water at the narrow entrance to the Palace Arcade.
It was this perfect nightmare. I mean, as soon as the water came in, Maurice and I didn't know him as Maurice yet. At the time, he was just the guy I'd pulled out of the floor, but Maurice and we jumped up on the air hockey table.
I guess we both had the same instinct because Dimitri pulled me up out of the pit and the water came up like right behind me and we both just jumped on top of the air hockey table. And good thing because a second later, just
Pop! There was this pop, and all the lights went out for a sec. And then the emergency lights came on, and we see these 3 guys floating face down in the water. It was the 3 guys who'd been standing next to me. Yeah.
they were dead. And, a second later, we would have been dead too.
So we're standing up there on the air hockey table for maybe 10 minutes, and the water goes up, and then suddenly it goes out.
It was like watching the tide go in and out. All this water was rushing in, up from the floor, and also from down the hall, just rushing in. And the air hockey table was shaking, but we were pressing into the ceiling, which was like above us, like to balance ourselves. And then the water reversed. Like we just watched it reverse. It just started running out. And the 3 bodies, just those 3 guys, they just got sucked right out the door. They just disappeared.
I remember watching those bodies go out the arcade, and we didn't really even have time to process that. We'd just seen 3 guys get electrocuted or drowned or whatever. I've been processing it ever since, but at that moment, we were just in survival mode.
We were just trying to stay balanced.
We had our arms pressed into the ceiling because we could feel the air hockey table wobbling underneath us. The water hadn't come up above it yet, but it was like floating a little bit, hydroplaning.
Yeah, we'd feel it lift up, and then we'd kind of push off the ceiling just to push it back down. And at one point, I felt it slip, and I almost fell over. And we didn't know if the water was still electrified or not, but we definitely didn't want to fall in.
And then the water got still, and we felt the table settle. We thought, okay, good. Started to catch our breath a bit.
Only had like a second before we saw the shark.
This dorsal fin cutting through the water towards us. That's when I remember the mall had an aquarium with 2 hammerhead sharks.
It was a crazy thing to see. Like it's hard to really process like what you're looking at. Like at that point I thought about praying, but I figured maybe this was like maybe this is part of God's plan or something, because it's just it's too weird not to be. I mean, like all of it.
But that shark, it went right past us, right past the table. And I swear, it went right to the back corner by that claw machine, and it stuck its big fucking head right into the Otranto machine.
And then there was just lightning across the water. Like we jumped up. I could smell the smoke.
And its tail broke the water and thrashed around for a second, splashed us, and then was still. Died with its head jammed in the same fucking game that kid had been playing. It's It's things like that. It's things like that. And only a minute later, who comes through the door? That fucking kid.
The same kid. The one who had stolen our demo hammer. He comes swimming, like wading through the door. And he's got this crazy fucking look in his eye. And he's saying like, here's where it ends. Here's where it ends.
Here's where it ends. And he's looking all around the room. I guess the water wasn't electric anymore, but he's looking around and he's not even seeing us. We're standing there on the hockey table, and he's not even seeing us. He was huffing and puffing, and I could tell he was trying to do more damage, but this time it seemed like he probably wanted to do it to himself.
That kid was ready to kill himself, for sure. Like, I think he was just figuring out how to do it. Like, I don't think he planned to make it that far if he planned anything. He was just, he's just like huffing and looking around the room and just looking like this caged animal. And then, Dimitri tried talking to him, like he shouted out to him.
I said, "Hey kid, it's over." And he stopped, standing about maybe waist deep in water, all these overturned video games around him, and the back half of this dead shark bobbing in the water next to him. And he looked at us. I think he saw us for the first time.
He stopped, and he looked up at us. And at first, I was thinking, what are you doing, man? This kid was ignoring us. But then I saw the kid might actually be listening, so maybe it was worth saying something to him. Try to stop him from hurting us, or...
I said, "You did what you wanted to do, didn't you? You broke the castle walls. You killed the king." I don't know why I went there right away, but I guess I thought maybe with the whole place looking like a castle and a lot of the games in there being castle themed, maybe he thought he was like a warrior or something. That's why I said it. I said, "You broke the castle walls. You killed the king." I said, "The throne is yours. The throne is yours. You did what you wanted to do, didn't you?" And the kid just stood there for a second, huffing. He was really tall and muscular, but he was just a kid. He looked lost. And he said, "I'm not trying to break in. I'm trying to break out."
He said, "I'm trying to break out." And, in the weirdest way, like, I don't know, I knew what he meant, I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's, then I started talking to him. I said, I don't know, I just said, I know it can feel like forever, man, but it's not. It's gonna be over. Just stop. Whatever you're doing, just stop, and it'll be over, and we'll all get outside of this. We'll all get outside of this. And he looked at us, and he didn't say anything this time. He just looked at us, and then he started crying. And so Dimitri and I looked at each other, and then we looked back at the kid and we reached out to him.
We reached out. We said, "Come on, get on the table, get out of the water."
We tried to pull him up, and he's crying. So we crouched down to pull him up, and we saw that it's just this confused kid, And he reaches out, and he's about to take our hands.
I felt his fingertips. And then the water sucked him away.
The water rushed back, and he slammed into the wall hard.
The water was moving again. He looks like he got knocked out. He went right under the water.
Knocked him out. And then pulled him out the door. And he was gone. I don't know, we watched him for a second. And then we weren't pressing on the ceiling anymore. And the water was rushing and pulling again, out, and the table floated up, and we just slipped and fell right on our asses.
We both hit the deck, and the air hockey table was like a boat. It lifted it up and it started floating towards the door with us on it. Right at the last second, I grabbed the edge of the door and the table got sucked out from under us and we fell off. But we didn't land in water. We landed on the soggy carpet of the arcade. And the last of the water rushed away.
And we were on the ground and the water rushed out and we just, both of us crouched there and we just watched everything rush away.
So you two haven't seen each other since that day?
No, never saw that guy Maurice again. Found out his name after.
No, but I think about him a lot of the time, I hope he's doing okay.
MallWalk is a production of KGEI Redwood Shores. In this episode, you've heard the voices of Blair Van Auken, Dimitri Severne, Maurice Reed, and Officer Wes Barker. Music for this episode was produced by Nine Inch Nails, Disconscious, and Harry Gibbons. I'm Celia Maddox. For episodes, show notes, and a complete track listing, visit our website, mallwalkpodcast.com. Finish the mall walk with us as we crawl over the wreckage, next time in our series finale, Negative Space.